we want to go into the weeds with where people actually live, because the way that we're going to equip and disciple people is we're actually going to talk about the things they're facing every day. And what they're facing is a bombardment from society of ideologies that are umbilical, and everything from sexuality to gender issues to race. There's so many things. Victimhood is elevated as a virtue. And so we have to teach them to think about these things, because they are fish swimming in water that they don't even realize that they're swamped in every day. And if they don't have a perspective for learning how to see it and understand it, then they're going to get devoured. And so, we've had people, as we've addressed things, who think, well, if we just be really nice and maybe, and they just don't know what time it is. That's what we say. They just don't understand what time it is. They think we're living in a different time than what we're living in. But most of people, it's been the opposite. It's drawing people who say we're seeking green pasture.
Truth. Same here.
Sheep are looking for green pasture right now.
Still waters.
So churches that are willing to feed sheep, sheep are flocking to.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
And here's what's interesting. I think it's very different than what was happening in the sheep swapping era of seeker-sensitive church. Who can have the coolest church, the bells and whistles? And we just, we saw sheep swapping going on for whoever had the coolest kids ministry and whoever had the most youth, going there. And I think that day's over. But what's interesting is I do think people are leaving churches to go to strong churches. And I think the trend we're going to see in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, is I think churches that don't know what time it is are going to fade into irrelevance. They're going to die, because they're not going to be discipling people in the very things they're facing. Francis Schaeffer talked about this. He talked about how the goal of the church is to disciple people in the total truth of reality in whatever issues they're facing every day. So we're trying to bring to bear what the truth about reality is in a world where attacks against that reality are constant, and they're in the different form of different things in different generations. But the church that's faithful is looking at how to do that in their generation.
On the word of God, I will build my house. I will build my house.
Welcome to Grounded. I'm Steve Hartland, senior pastor at Cornerstone Community Church in Joppa, Maryland, which is north of Baltimore, if you want to locate us. And I have a guest with me today. He is the author of this book. Let me hold it up. There it is. It's called Hold the Line, and his name is Erik Reed. So we're going to discuss his book. So welcome, Erik.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
It's a pleasure. Let's find out about you a little bit first, if you don't mind. So, where are you born and raised? I'm Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, born and raised near Maryland, near Baltimore, Maryland. How about you?
So I am actually born and raised in the same town that I pastor in. So from Lebanon, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville.
Wow. You born and raised there?
Went to Lebanon High School. Yeah. And went to the Army for 4 years. So during that time I was away. But other than that, this has always been home.
Wow. Where'd you go in the Army? You went some overseas?
Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, jumped out of airplanes. Yeah. I was a younger man in those days.
Yeah. How's your back?
I've had back surgery years ago.
I'm sorry, man.
So it's good now.
Everybody I've ever met who jumps has a bad back.
Yeah, those bulging discs, it's hard to take that pounding. So.
Well, I'm glad you're good now.
Yep.
Tell us about your education. Where'd you go to college? Where'd you do grad school? What all you got?
Yep, went to Western Kentucky University, which is about an hour and 15 minutes from where I live now. Went GI Bill, paid for it all. Did a religious studies major and a history minor. And then after that, I went to Vanderbilt Divinity School for about a year and a half, 3 semesters.
Vanderbilt, yes.
Yeah, before finally saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
I can't keep subjecting myself to this. And went to Southern Seminary and finished my MDiv there.
Yeah, way to go, man. Likewise, I'm an MDiv. So you probably never heard of the school I went to. It was near D.C. It's now been subsumed by, it's operating under the auspices of Lancaster, Pennsylvania Bible College, but it's Capital Bible Seminary, which was basically a smaller East Coast Dallas theological seminary. So I was saved when I was 18, 17, went right to college when I was 18, and it was all like Dallas theology, heavy duty dispensationalism and all that. Yeah, that was my background.
Okay.
Nice. I've had a few root canals since then. little
I
drilling
hear
and
you.
filling. Yeah. So I'm assuming you're a family man. You're married. You got some kids. Tell us about it.
Yep, I am married to my wife Katrina. We hit our 20-year anniversary last year, and
Congrats.
have three children. Caleb, who is with the Lord, passed away a couple years ago.
Mm.
He was 15 years old, and then I
Mm.
have two daughters, Kaylee and Kyra, who are 13 and 9.
13 and 9. Just so you'll know, my wife and I have 4 sons and a foster son, and we just had grandchild number 13, bro. It's riches,
Wow,
let me tell you. It's riches.
13
And they
grandkids.
all live close to us. So,
That's
man,
incredible.
we have grandkids in our life. Yeah.
That's awesome.
We'll probably see you and hold the baby tonight. So, you're pastor of the Journey Church. Tell us about the Journey Church. It's been around a while. In fact, I think I read you were part of the Journey Church, not as a pastor, some years ago. Is that correct? Or am I confusing you?
Well, I was a part of planting the Journey Church. So I was the co-pastor of planting the church 17 years ago. We were planted by a local church, and yeah, I was 25 years old, had no idea what I was doing, but I had a passion. I was really passionate, which is what young men at least have, if nothing else. And yeah, I thought we were starting one kind of church. 17 years later, we're a very different kind of church by the grace of God. But yeah, God has really just blessed our church. We've seen incredible things happen, ministries that are just, really making an impact in the community, seeing people come to faith, discipling them. But yeah, I've been there 17 years.
Pretty awesome, man. Love it. So you're the author of this book. I'll show it again. Hold the
Yep.
Line. I read this recently, really loved it. And that's how come we're talking, by the way. It's what attracted me to you. But I think you've written some others, have you? What are they?
Yeah, I wrote a book called Uncommon Trust, where I talked about trusting God in the midst of suffering and
Hmm.
learning to understand, what it means to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, which is the battle that you go through when you face um, suffering and trials of many kinds. Is you want to understand it, you want to wrap your mind around it, and while trusting the Lord with all your hearts it makes for a great bumper sticker,
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
hard thing to actually do when you're in the middle of crisis. And 17 years of pastoring coupled with 15 years of having a son with medical issues, that had to be a real thing for us. We had to really learn what it meant to trust. So I wrote a book on how you trust the Lord, and the synopsis is you have to actually trust in the Lord. You have to know Him. Yet you can't trust who you don't know.
Hmm.
And so the attributes of God actually help us in trusting God. And so I tie how the attributes of God actually give us a confidence in His promises and the things that we're going through.
Pretty sweet. All right. I haven't read that one, but sounds good. I'll recommend it. So, Erik, you wrote this book. I'll hold it up a third time. Going to be obnoxious doing this. Here it is. Hold the Line. Why did you write this book? Like in big picture first, then we'll go into some details. What is it about? Why did the world need this book? Or to put it another way, what problems are you trying to address? And before I hand you the floor yet, I'm going to ask it another way. So many years ago, I was very sick. I was like 30s, and I was sick, man, and we couldn't figure out what's wrong. And I went to see this doctor. He was supposed to be a really great doctor in Riverside, California. And he was an old crotchety guy, scored really low on agreeableness, man. He didn't agree with nobody about nothing. So he said, young man, medicine is diagnosis, and diagnosis is history. So give me the history. That's kind of how he was. So medicine is diagnosis. What are you diagnosing? What needed a cure or a fix? Why'd you write this book?
So several things. One, as I've pastored in the middle of a very rapidly changing culture, right? When I started the church, it was 2005/6 timeframe, right? When our core group
Hmm.
met and we started launching out actually publicly and meeting. And from 2005 and 6 to today, we've undergone incredible changes in our society. Um, Belief in God, social justice movements, so many different things, LGBTQ plus issues. All these things have just swept through our country and has drastically changed um, what people think is good, beautiful, and true. Right, the old
Hmm.
triad.
Hmm.
Right, and so pastoring in the midst of that has been interesting because I'm watching how people are facing these different pressures and these strains, and on top of that, I guess it was 2010, the Lord opened the door for me to begin speaking to students at student camps and different student ministry
Hmm.
events. And I've had a chance to speak to tens of thousands of students over the years. And they are the ones that are on the front lines of this stuff. they're the ones who I think are most vulnerable to the lies and to be taken captive by
Yeah,
these
they really are.
philosophies and empty deceits. And so I started watching, even as I spoke and interacted in those places and with student pastors, just the pressures that people were facing and students were facing. And the church, on top of that, wasn't necessarily responding to prepare people, to give them the foundations, to equip them for how to think Christianly in a very rapidly unchristian culture. And so that was the basis of the book. And of course, hold the line is a kind of a military term, right? Holding the line
Yeah.
is like holding the battlefront line. And
Hmm.
being in my background, I figured the combination made sense, right? We need the church and we need believers to learn how to hold the line against a culture that's trying to continue to take ground.
Yeah. I think I hear Jocko Willink. I listen to him occasionally. And I heard Jocko use that phrase, with his Navy SEAL background, hold the line.
Hold the
So,
line. That's right.
so I like it. So yeah, on page 4 you mentioned, and I'm not going to go page by page through your book. We'll be here 3 days. But you mentioned that there's an onslaught of cultural pressure to conform to beliefs and practices that others deem acceptable. You just kind of mentioned some of those a few minutes ago, but so we know what they are. It's like, the cultural revolution, the sexual revolution, the LGBTQ, plus the gender confusion stuff, all the woke stuff, all that going on.
Yep.
What would you say? How great is the pressure on the average Christian in your church or the average family in your church?
Oh, it's real. I mean, here we are in the Bible Belt. This is how I knew it was getting real. Is we're here in the Bible Belt, right? Maybe arguably the buckle of the Bible Belt, and we're seeing our folks deal with this and their corporate jobs in the university that's here in our town. It's like, no, it's right here in Lebanon, and that's how I knew, like, okay, this is pervasive, right? This is pervasive. This is growing in its reach. Because of social media, it now has a medium for propagating ideas rapidly. And so that for me that was the sign that I was like, this is drastically uh, taking ground. And the church is so far from being equipped for this. It's like, in World War II, when the Nazi war machine just started taking over Europe, the U.S. didn't deploy for a while. A lot of people don't realize that. Like, it took the U.S. years to build up their military because it had been so depleted. Post World War One, the U.S. posture towards war is we don't want anything to do with it. We're kind of isolationists. We don't want to get involved in all that European stuff again. And as a result of that, when it finally was like, oh no, we're under threat too. Like, this is going to touch our shore if we don't get this right. We weren't ready. And I feel like that's where the church is. Like, we were so used to just skirting through. Most people mirrored our ethical, moral beliefs. Most people generally respected Christians, even if they weren't born again themselves. And now that's all changed. And we've got a church looking around and Christians looking around going, what do we do? Because we actually never really put those roots in.
Yeah, several people are arguing that this has been coming slowly. You know how tipping points are. It's slow, it's slow until it's not, right? All of a sudden there's a tipping point and boom. And it seems like some are saying that the gradual build began at the Enlightenment when we left off rooting everything in God and doctrine and Scripture and revealed truth. And it's been building slowly. But man, did it ever bust out recently in the U.S., huh?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Aaron Renn's
I've actually had him on the podcast.
Yeah, his framework for the 3 worlds of evangelicalism, I think, is a helpful grid for thinking about what's changed and how it's changed, right? From positive world to neutral world and negative world. Yeah, the Enlightenment period was the beginning of really the societies in the Western world's questioning of authority, right? When Martin Luther, launched the Reformation, it was good in many ways, but one of the side effects was we're skeptical of the church's authority. We're skeptical of what they're saying about these things. And we're downstream from that now, where we're skeptical of even the word truth. We put my truth and his truth and her truth in front of the word now, right? We put pronouns in front of the word truth.
Instead of, well, what's God's truth on this, right?
What is the truth, is really almost an irrelevant question today. That's considered an irrelevant question. There's no the truth. there's my truth.
Yeah, we're right
And
back with Pilate when Jesus was before him, right? And Pilate says, "What is truth?"
I'm actually preaching that this week. We're in the Gospel of John, and that's my text this week.
Oh, we've been in the Gospel of John, by the way. We did John chapter 6 recently. Now we're in John chapter 10. And in between there around Easter, we did John 19 on Good Friday and John 20 on Resurrection Day. So
Nice.
we're loving the Gospel of John. But incidentally, we're
good.
about to go to Deuteronomy. So that ought
There
to
you
be
go.
fun. Yeah. But yeah, Gospel of John, loving it. So let me ask a specific now, because things you're talking about made me think of this. So how does this affect people in your town? How does this affect people in our town and in our churches? So we have some teachers, public school teachers. You probably do too. We have a public school principal. She actually resigned and isn't working this year because she said, I can't work over there anymore. You know, I just can't. I can't agree to I can't say what they want me to say. But what would you say to a teacher? And they've got a classroom and they're being told, when that girl says she's a boy and wants to be called Bill, you must call the boy Bill. What do you tell that teacher?
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I wrote an article on whether Christians should use people's preferred pronouns because of this very issue. Because we've got people in the workplace and corporate settings that are facing that. It's real life, right? Whether it be at school or at work. Call me they them. When it's
Yeah.
an individual.
Yeah.
So this is how I help them think about it. We don't want to live according to laws, right? We don't want to embrace laws.
Rod Dreher, live not by lies.
Absolutely. We may not be able to change the culture with our message, with our with what we think is right, but we don't have to bend the knee to what we know is wrong. And I think that's a good starting point. So Paul says, if possible, live at peace with all men. So far as it depends on you, live at peace with all men. That's a really important verse because what that means is that the goal is peace. We don't want to live on the warpath with everybody every day and poking holes in everybody's worldview. We want peace with people. But so long as that peace depends on us, and what I'm finding is in the school settings and at work settings and things like that, they are putting Christians in position where it's no longer dependent on them. So far as it depends on me, I'm going to have peace. But now you're putting me in a position where the peace being held is not dependent on me anymore. You're forcing a different posture. And so I do think Christians are going to have to really consider their relationship to different types of institutions and environments. And we've got to be prepared to say, my conscience convicts me, and I'm not gonna call you a pronoun that I don't think is accurate. Now, that doesn't mean we should go out of our way to,
get ourselves
purposely
fired.
offend.
Yeah.
I think, in fact, we should go out of our way to try to avoid controversy where we can. So if you've got a male employee telling you that he wants to be called she, her, I think you ought to avoid ever saying she, her, but maybe just use the name.
Right. Can I use your last name?
Yes, right. Just find whatever ways you can
Find a way
to avoid, to have peace. But you don't have to bow the knee simply because somebody's telling you embrace a alternate reality than the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to all that. Switching gears a little bit. So on page 22, we're up to 22 already. You're talking about Jesus, and I think you're even mentioning John 6 there, and you get to talking about Jesus and the seeker church thing. In John 6 and even up through John 10, the crowd gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and like all we had to do was give them bread, right? They just wanted bread. Give us some more bread. Right. Can we have this bread always? And if he just said, sure, I got to keep my crowd here, so I'll just give you bread, all the bread you want, free bread. But so what about Jesus and the secret church? Was Jesus a church growth guru? Did he develop and work a methodology for attracting and keeping a large crowd and so on? You want to talk about all that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point I'm trying to raise there is, every time you see Jesus with crowds around him, he's usually going to say something offensive very quickly. That tends to be his pattern. So, it's funny. John tells us like great crowds were following him. And then he stands up and tells people, eat my flesh and drink my blood. Right. Or in Luke 14, it says great crowds followed him. And he tells them, unless you hate your father and mother. And I mean, it's the very first thing out of his mouth. And so people began to grapple with the hard sayings of Jesus, but he wasn't concerned with simply drawing a crowd. He wasn't concerned with just let's just see if we can keep everybody, kind of tenuously connected to the movement here. He was there to speak truth, and what that did is truth alienates people. Some people embrace the truth. Some people are seeking the truth. Some people hate the truth, and it alienates them when it's spoken, no matter how nicely you speak it. I think that's one of the challenges that we're running into in our world today. Is I think we got believers who think that if we're just kind enough, nice enough,
Nice.
you know, we
Thodey's
just
11th command.
if we just say it with enough, gentleness, that it's somehow going to change the posture of the people receiving it. And that's a farce.
Yeah.
It's not. You can be as kind and gentle and loving and soft in delivering truth as you want, and it's not your delivery, it's your message
It's
that
the
they're going to
truth.
hate.
Yeah. No matter how nicely you say it, when you still say men are men and women are women, you're in trouble.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You're going against. So we've developed a culture that, in many ways, has a doctrine and a dogma. They have evangelists and preachers. There are heretics, and
It's a
there is
religion.
excommunication.
Amen.
And Christians who believe the Bible are the heretics who are threatened to be excommunicated from the public square and from the social discourse at every turn.
Yeah,
We call it cancel.
we're the new
We call
evil
it cancel
people.
culture, right? But it's excommunication. It's
Yes.
you're a blasphemer. Is what it is.
You're out.
You're out.
Yeah. Yeah, amen to that. On page 24, you mentioned, staying on this same theme, that allegiance to Jesus produces conflict even within families sometimes, within marriages sometimes, certainly in societies, and I'm going to add in churches. So over these very issues now, especially, right? I mean, we're really seeing that where families are divided up over woke stuff. People leave churches over woke stuff. You had any of that in your church? Have you had any people saying that you should just be nice and don't say anything that could be offensive because then we can't bring our friends and all that kind of stuff?
We've had some people who have mentioned that. Since 2015. So if you follow, Ren's framework, that's roughly 14, 15 is when things shifted dramatically. I think you can trace it down back to the Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri shooting. And I think that's when all the social justice stuff really was a tipping point in society, followed by the Obergefell case. And those things rapidly brought change. What's interesting is since 2015 to today, all the COVID stuff, all the election 2020 stuff. I mean, we've had just societal chaos, for years now. And yet we've grown tremendously, not by tiptoeing around issues, but by just speaking about them intelligently, biblically. I think there's something we gotta make sure. If we think that we can avoid talking about those issues and we're helping people, those days have passed. Like, just thinking like if we just have the coolest bells and whistles at our church, people are going to come. They don't care. Being a Christian is not giving you social status anymore. In fact, it's going to cost you social credit to be a Christian, which means they're not going to go to church, if they're not really seeking the Lord or seeking the truth. There's no positive net gain it's going to give them. So they're not going to look for something that's just kind of cool and fluffy. They need substance. They need to be trained. They need to be equipped. They want to learn how to think. So I say that to say we've been addressing these issues in a way that is talking honestly about them, looking biblically at them, without, though, becoming what I think you have down the road from me in Mountain Juliet, Tennessee, in an individual by the name of Greg Locke, who is, boisterous, political focus, rants and raves, and he does things for shock value. We're not interested in being a slightly more Christian version than Hannity. Right. You know what I mean? Like we're not trying to be the political folks. We want to address things. We want to, we want to go into the weeds with where people actually live. Because the way that we're going to equip and disciple people is we're actually going to talk about the things they're facing every day. And what they're facing is a bombardment from society of ideologies that are unbiblical. and everything from sexuality to gender issues to race. There's so many things. Victimhood is elevated as a virtue. And so we have to teach them to think about these things because they are fish swimming in water that they don't even realize that they're swamped in every day. And if they don't have a perspective for learning how to see it and understand it, then they're going to get devoured. And so we've had people as we've addressed things who think, well, if we just be really nice and maybe, and they just don't know what time it is. That's what we say. They just don't understand what time it is. They think we're living in a different time than what we're living in. But most of people, it's been the opposite. It's drawing people who say we're seeking green pasture.
Truth. Same here.
Sheep are looking for green pasture right now.
Still waters.
So churches that are willing to feed sheep are flocking to.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
And here's what's interesting. I think it's very different than what was happening in the sheep swapping era of seeker-sensitive church, who can have the coolest church, the bells and whistles. And we just, we saw sheep swapping going on for whoever had the coolest kids ministry and whoever had the most youth, going there. And I think that day's over. But what's interesting is I do think people are leaving churches to go to strong churches. And I think the trend we're going to see in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, is I think churches that don't know what time it is are going to fade into irrelevance. They're going to die because they're not going to be discipling people in the very things they're facing. Francis Schaeffer talked about this. He talked about how the goal of the church is to disciple people in the total truth of reality in whatever issues they're facing every day. So we're trying to bring to bear what the truth about reality is in a world where attacks against that reality are constant, and they're in the different form of different things in different generations. But the church that's faithful is looking at how to do that in their generation. So I think what's going to happen is that your faithful churches are actually going to grow larger, and you're going to see many churches begin to die and fade into irrelevance. They're going to die out as their congregation ages and they're gone.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw this. You probably did. So COVID hit. Our governor, who was pretty fair to churches, pretty fair to everybody, we all appreciated him, but he shut us all down, but only for about, I forget, 2 months or something. And then he said you can reopen, but with distancing and all that. And so we reopened immediately, man. We did shut down, but we reopened immediately. And then, of course, all the crazy culture stuff with LGBTQ and whatnot's going on. And man, did we ever have a lot of people come to us for two reasons. One is they wanted to worship somewhere and their church was closed.
That's right.
And then also their church was going wokey and putting in unisex bathrooms and whatever. And so, wow, exactly what you're saying. A lot of people who wanted the strong word and just give me the truth from the word came our way then. So
the seeker-sensitive movement, in many ways, I think the next phase of that movement is they think if they can, again, be trendy enough, which will mean softening their doctrinal stances, they can reach the unchristian and the scoffer, right? And the one who's denying reality. They think if we don't talk against those things, if we just accommodate, then we can show them Jesus. And that's not going to work. It's not going to work. And it's going to lead to them dying, because true believers aren't needing to be at a place that's soft peddling a, kind of a candy gospel that's trying to tell people like, oh yeah, hey, God loves you just like that. Just, come on and be a part of what we're doing. And, we're open and affirming. And it's like, that's a pathway to death, because those Christians who actually believe the Bible aren't going to stay in that church. And the people at the churches who are doing that aren't going to reach people they think they're reaching, because again, the page is turned, right? Identifying as a Christian is not going to give you anything. There's no perks and benefits coming. So why do you think anybody's drawn to that? I think it's a death spiral for those churches that do it. And I think a lot of seeker-sensitive churches are going that way.
Plus, with all that softness and lack of doctrine, lack of distinctions and things, you're not really presenting them Jesus. It's a very truncated Jesus, right? Jesus is speaking through the words of his apostles. Jesus is speaking in Ephesians. Romans is Jesus talking, using Paul's pen and so on. So you're not really giving them Jesus.
Jesus says that all who are of me, are of the truth.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so here's the thing: you can't, if you're of the truth, then you're on Team Jesus, and if you're not in the truth, then you're not on Team Jesus, because he is all about the truth.
Truth. Amen. So in chapter 3, you use a couple phrases that I really like. I'm going to run past one. I'll mention it, and then I want to park on the other one for a moment.
Okay.
You talk about low bar Christianity, and I think that's what we're talking about right now,
Yep,
the seeker
that's
movement.
right.
But that's a
right.
cool term, low bar Christianity. We don't want to be low bar Christianity, man. We want to be high bar, like as high as the Bible sets the bar, as high as Christ and his apostles set the bar. We want to be right there, right? But
That's what's bearing fruit. Absolutely.
yeah, amen. But then you use this phrase, and I want to know, did you make this up? I don't think so. I think I'd heard it before. Who started this phrase? Moralistic therapeutic deism. What is that, and where did it come from? Do you know?
I don't remember who first coined that. I've heard that now probably for about 10 years. I'm sure we could run that down and hunt down who coined that. What it means is simply a self-help, therapeutic gospel, that it's all about coming to Jesus for the better financial
Yes.
principles Jesus can give you.
Yes.
It's the
Marriage principles.
God who wants to help you to have a better family and raise nicer children. That's been for many years what a lot of churches were peddling, was a therapeutic moralistic deism. God is just here to help you to be a better person, and it will be good for you, right? It's therapeutic to grow and to find yourself, and
Yeah.
that kind of message. And so what you had in many ways are the moralistic therapeutic deism, right, gospel, and then kind of the low bar Christianity gospel, kind of run in parallel and sometimes overlapped. This was positive world and neutral world, encapsulated. That kind of stuff had some place when people wanted or needed to go for, to make sure their social status or Christian card stayed current. And now those things are irrelevant.
Yeah. Throw in a little bit of victory preaching.
Yep.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Your enemy, who might be your boss or your taxes or your whatever, preaching against the enemy, and you can have victory and all that.
Victory, breakthroughs, come get your breakthrough, that kind of stuff.
All that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm going to read a little piece from page 47 because I really liked it. So I'm going to read it, and we can talk about it. You wrote on page 47, still, not a few professing evangelicals have tried at all costs to win acceptance and approval from extreme progressive voices. I call these evangelicals progressive light. It's like Bud Light, but it's progressive light. These folks claim to hold a biblical sexual ethic, but never talk about it, and refuse to criticize the damage of the LGBTQ plus revolution. People like, you name Beth Allison Barr, apologized to, quote, Chrissy Stroop, and then deleted her tweets and so on. So these professing believers seldom criticize unbiblical expressions of gender or marriage, but freely criticize the slightest perversion of the complementarian view. Many of these folks profess to be politically neutral, but rarely criticize the harmful liberal policies and positions while regularly distancing themselves from conservative political views. So I think you're talking there about this was James Wood, wasn't it? Did he coin this, that you punch right and coddle left?
Yeah, I don't know if he coined it or not, but that's exactly the issue. Progressive lights want to maintain their conservative credentials without ever saying anything conservative.
That's good, man. Say that again. That's really good.
Yeah. They want to maintain their conservative credentials without ever saying anything conservative. And the reason for that is because it costs them. They want acceptance so badly from the liberal elite in our society. And so they want to get as close to that line as possible so that they will be liked, and not those kind of Christians.
We're not that kind of Christian.
Right. Not
You'll
those
like
kind
us.
of Christians.
Uh-huh.
So they never talk about the corrosive, just, awful things that progressive ideology is ushering into culture. Like, very rarely will you see, for example, a Beth Moore ever criticize anything about the LGBTQ movement. won't say a word.
Yeah.
And yet it's very easy for her to take pop shots all day long at conservatives,
Yeah.
right? But she would classify herself as a conservative Bible believing Christian.
Yeah.
That's the picture. And there are many. I'm not picking on Beth. Beth has actually been super kind to our family in the past with our son's health issues, but that's still reality. It's still, that's the posture. The posture is we're conservative, right? We believe the Bible's sexual ethics and we believe the Bible's view on gender, but we're never going to say that. We're never going to outline it. We're never going to talk about the damage that's being done in the church by the culture that's discipling our people on these new ideologies. And that's what they're doing. The culture is discipling. They're catechizing our every generation, right, through different mediums, music and television and the education system and media. And so we never talk about that. But you let a conservative say something stupid that we would all say that was stupid, they pounce. And they want to validate to the elites that we're not like them. And yet they'll never say anything that would make the elites go, oh, you're against that. And so they play this middle ground. That's why I call them progressive lights. They've not really adopted the ideology, at least we don't think they have. But boy, they want that acceptance from them really badly.
Yeah. And then we get people in our churches, and I've had a little bit of this, maybe you have too, where let's just say, I haven't been preaching in Romans lately, love to. A lot of places I'd love to preach, right? Man, I want to preach everywhere. But let's say I'm preaching through Romans 1 and we come down to those hard parts where Paul's saying men with men doing shameful things and the women leaving the natural use and all that. And what you're supposed to do is when you get down to those verses, instead of just like really preaching faithfully, lovingly, appropriately preaching the content of the verses, what you do is when you get there, you take about 16 weeks and first apologize for how evangelicals have been so slow to treat people right, and so you just apologize. You preach into Ephesians 5, and you come to wives, be submissive to your husbands. You don't really preach that. What you preach is, we're so sorry, this has been so abused by awful men and blah blah.
Men have been abusive.
And no doubt some men have been abusive, but hey, the Spirit of God and the Apostle Paul didn't feel like they needed to put out 4 pages of caveat first before they just dumped the goods and said, wives, be submissive to your husbands.
That's a perfect picture of the progressive light approach. We're not going to espouse conservative views. We're not rejecting them per se, but we will point out to you every ill or wrong that's ever been done in the name of them.
Yes. Yeah. And again, with that thing then, so see, we're not that kind of Christian.
We're not them.
The kind that would just preach the text. Yeah.
Yeah. We're so much trendier, right? We're so much more acceptable. And we're so much more palatable. And let's just be honest, that's enticing. It's enticing to be liked and be accepted because the alternative stinks, right? To be name called and maligned and, all these things is not an easy thing to embrace, which is why Peter denied Christ 3 times, because associating with him in that courtyard was costly. And so we live in the courtyard, right, of Annas and Caiaphas. We live in the courtyard of there's opposition against Jesus, and to acknowledge you're one of his disciples is going to get the ear of the culture against you. It's gonna make you unpopular, and that's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. So what do we need? We need clear convictions, courage and fortitude, and we need to hold the line, right? We just need
we got to actually know what we believe, and then we have to have the courage to believe it publicly.
Yeah. Amen to that. So chapter 5 in your book is titled Contend for the Faith, and you've got on page 58 Churchill's famous Fight on the Beaches speech in there. I love that, man. I love Churchill. I got men on my walls, and Churchill's one of them, and I love that guy. I read all 3 volumes of The Last Lion because they were...
me too.
You too? Yeah, brother. There you go. So why is this chapter Contend for the Faith in there? And you mentioned, I love this phrase, contending for the faith is an all-skate activity.
It's an all skate.
That's pretty good. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first off, Churchill single-handedly may be the reason why we're not speaking German.
Amen. Single-handedly save the world.
Save the world, because he was unwilling to bow the knee to a tyrant. He was willing to lose with integrity than to bow the knee to preserve himself. And we see biblical pictures of that everywhere. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego do the same. But the most recent one, and really just powerful one is Churchill. And it's a reminder to us that the confidence and courage of one man to stand up for what was right and true rallied an entire nation and then
And
nations
the
to that
world.
cause.
Yeah.
In other
The new
words,
world.
it really does make a difference. It really
Mm.
can move the needle of what happens. And so, thinking about that, when we think about what contending for the faith means, it means we need some more Churchillian type believers who are willing to say, even if the world's against me, even if they think we're crazy, even if they call us names, we're going to fight for the truth. We're going to contend for the faith. We're going to hold it out. We're not going to bow the knee, right? We're not going to tell and embrace lies, right? That's and it's an all skate. It's not we need a couple church leaders to do it. It's not we need a pastor or two to do it. We need every congregant in the seat learning to be courageous to do this. And I call it an all skate for those who don't know, because when I was a kid, we would go to the skating ring and they would have certain groups that call out, right? And there was a couple skate, and there was games, and there were these different types of things.
Men
And then at
only,
some point they
women
would
only.
announce it's an all skate. Everybody's on the rink, and that's what this is. Contending for the faith is not set aside for the pastors; it's an all skate for every believer.
Excellent, man. So I'd like to talk about this lots more, but I'm conscious of the clock, and I want to go to a different topic. It's related, but it's a different topic. So,
Yeah.
and I'll make this the last one we talk about today. So recently I saw you tweet. I follow you on Twitter. Thank you very much. You put up a lot of good stuff. And there was a recent tweet about you meeting with businessmen/entrepreneurs in your church
Yeah.
who are actively seeking ways to increase their revenues and launch more businesses for the sake of funding ministry.
Yep.
And you wrote, I liked this, any pastor can be doing this in their church.
Yep.
So
Yep.
talk about it. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, well, it started it started with need, right? So our church has grown over the years, and we've never done a capital campaign. I'm not a fundraiser naturally. I don't like going and begging wealthy donors for money. I've never met a pastor that is honestly who likes that. We didn't get into ministry to go ask people to give us money, and so in 2018 we realized we had to have our first capital campaign. We were just tapped. We didn't have the resources that we needed to do the things we needed to do. We were at 5 services in our building. I was preaching 2 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday morning. I mean, it was not sustainable.
Good thing
Not
you're a young
sustainable.
man.
And so we had additional ambitions that we wanted to run after. In addition to a new space, we had staff we wanted to add. There was ministries we wanted to launch. So we wanted to launch a jail ministry and a recovery ministry. Lots of different things that are mercy ministry related. So we did a capital campaign to raise money for those things, and it was successful. We did it. We
Awesome.
launched all those things. We added those staff members. We relocated our facilities, and then 3 years later, we were right back in the same
Tapped
boat.
out again.
Right back in the same boat.
3 years.
And 3 years. Yeah, and that's what I was telling you. That post-COVID stuff, man. I mean, our church is transformed. And so we were back in the same boat. And so, of course, we had a consultant firm that helped us the first time, because we're like, we've never done a capital campaign. What do we need to do? And the whole premise is you pay them a pretty significant amount of money, but paying them helps you to raise more money you could ever raise by yourself.
Yeah.
And so you're like, well, it's cost
worth
of doing
it.
business, but it's going to help us to do what we need to do. And we were back at it for a second time. And it was like, I just told a couple of people, I was like, I just don't want to go back to these same people and do this again. I'm just be honest with you. There's a whole process where you have to be like, you do 3 cups of coffee with each individual, and coffee cup 1, you talk about this. And I was just like, this feels gross. I hate this. I don't want to do that. And, so as a result, though, of that first round, here's what happened. I was able to build some relationships with business people and entrepreneurs in our church that previously I knew, but I didn't know, right? I didn't understand their world very much. I didn't understand wealth, and I didn't understand how they use assets and leverage those assets to gain and create more assets, and how they use equity in assets to gain more assets. I didn't know anything about that space. And as a result of building relationships with them, I started learning about some of those things. And that knowledge, coupled with knowing that we were about to go round 2 on this thing, I kind of had this harebrained idea. I was like, I don't know if this works, but rather than doing the traditional approach, which is, hey, the church has needs, hey, wealthy entrepreneur business guy, you've got resources. Can you sell something and give us the money? Right? Because wealthy people don't have $500,000 sitting in their checking accounts
Liquid.
because that's
Mm-hmm.
not doing anything for them. In fact, I was just talking to a guy yesterday who made the statement, it made me sick if I had $100,000 sitting in my checking account because it wouldn't be doing anything.
Uh-huh.
Literally yesterday, just had
Yeah.
this conversation. So that's their mentality. They're not sitting around with just liquid money. So if they're going to give you a large donation, they've got to sell
They got
something.
to sell something.
Yeah, got to liquidate. So here was the aha for me. Rather than asking wealthy businessmen, entrepreneurs who are skilled by God, Deuteronomy 8 says
they are.
God gives the ability to make wealth.
Yeah.
God is the one who, lest they think they've done this by their own strength, God has given them these skills and abilities and to make wealth. So, um, if if God has given them these abilities and these skills, why are we going to them and simply saying, "Hey, will you sell something and give us a one-time gift?" Because one, not only do we decrease their wealth, we decrease our ability to go back to them again
Hmm.
and get them to fund more ministry. So I said, why would we not ask these people who are highly skilled, knowledgeable, and experienced at multiplying wealth? That's what they do every day, is they use wealth to make wealth. Why would we not ask them to do more of that on purpose and maybe link
On
them up with some
purpose.
other
Like
people
with a
in our
vision for
church?
this. It's
Yeah,
intentional.
absolutely.
Did they respond to that on purpose
100%.
with yes? That
100%.
resonated with them?
Absolutely. So here's what's happened. So as a result of it, I'm now helping other pastors. I'm doing some consulting with other
I
pastors and
thought you
showing them how to
were.
launch this in their church
Uh-huh.
because this is transformational. It is I'll give you two examples right now that's happening in my church, just
Good.
right now. We've got a guy who is a part of a land development deal that is going to generate $850,000 worth of revenue. And he's going to give 50% of that profit to the church.
Sweet.
One deal.
Can
One
can
deal.
you give him my phone number?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was in a conversation. The same guy I was in a conversation with yesterday who made the $100,000 statement. He was giving me three or four things he's got in the hopper that he's like, yeah, I've got this going on. So here's what's happened. I've given them a vision. Some of them are doing stuff together now. That now they're networked together, whereas many of them didn't know each other.
Huh.
There's even discussions about forming some LLCs and launching some businesses together. I met with a lady this week in our church who has a very profitable daycare in a neighboring city. And I met with her and said, hey, would you consider opening a second one here in Lebanon and giving a large majority of the profits to the church? And she said, I'm actually have been thinking about that. Let's talk some more.
Pretty wild.
Listen, once people start catching the vision of this, here's the game changer. Is it's not requiring them to liquidate their wealth. They're actually
they get to make more.
Yeah. They're growing their wealth,
which they love,
and being more generous than they've ever been ever before.
Win-win.
And so the result of it is, and this is fascinating, is they actually feel more connected to the church's vision than they ever have before.
I believe it.
These are the people who, before we started having this conversation, I mean, they may help out greeting people in the lobby. Like we gave them things that are meaningful, but are not even in the ballpark of how they're actually gifted by God.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, when we can connect for them something that they've just made as their side, like, well, this is my secular job, take care of my family stuff. What we've done is we said, no, leave a legacy for your family, because it's great to leave something for your children's children. That's what Proverbs tells us. But also be leaving a legacy for your faith in your church. In other words, God didn't just gift you this so that you could just have more stuff.
Just your family.
Nothing wrong with you being blessed with wealth.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make them feel guilty for being wealthy. God doesn't. But what we do want them to feel responsible for is stewarding it, because the parable of the talent, the faithful ones were the ones who multiplied what the master gave them for the master's glory.
Excellent.
So that's the vision. And our group, I mean, there's some cool stuff. I mean, I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but so what I'm helping other churches do is realize, hey, you've got these people in your church too. They're everywhere. So it's about casting a compelling vision. It's about finding them, calling them to that vision, and then organizing them to start generating revenue for the church that's outside of tithes and offerings.
Excellent, man. Hey, all this has been really excellent. I want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to remind people once more, I won't hold it up for a fourth time, but your book, Hold the Line. Great book, folks. Get it, read it. It's not a huge book. You can read it in an evening or a couple evenings, depending on how long and how fast you read. But
We
Pastor
purposely
Erik
keep it
Reed,
short.
pardon me?
I said we purposely keep it short.
Purposely, so more people can and will read it.
That's right.
Yeah, amen. So thank you, Erik.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here with us on Grounded today. We come out twice a month on all the major platforms. And if you like, hey, give us a little comment and maybe even share with a friend, and you'll be helping us out. Thanks so much for being here. Hope to see you next time.